My name is Tammy Williams, and at 68 years old, I never thought I would have to teach my 34-year-old daughter Allison about respect. After putting her through law school as a single mother, I was invited to a dinner party at her upscale apartment with her colleagues. When I asked a question about some legal technology, Allison rolled her eyes and laughed at my expense. What happened next changed our relationship forever in ways neither of us expected. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and subscribe if you want more stories about family relationships that taught me life's most valuable lessons. I became a single mother when my husband Thomas died unexpectedly from a heart attack. Allison was only 9 years old then, and suddenly the comfortable middle-class life we had built together came crashing down around us. Thomas had been the primary breadwinner as an engineer, while I worked part-time as an elementary school teacher. His death left me not just emotionally devastated, but financially vulnerable. Within weeks of the funeral, I realized I needed to step up in ways I had never imagined. I immediately applied for full-time teaching positions and was fortunate enough to secure one at Lincoln Elementary about 20 miles from our home. The commute was long, but the salary was better than my previous school. Even so, a teacher's salary in the 90s was barely enough to maintain our modest 3-bedroom home and provide for a growing child. So I took on a second job. Every Saturday and Sunday, I worked as a bookkeeper for a local hardware store. I had no formal accounting training, but I had always been good with numbers and organization. I taught myself the basics from library books and through trial and error. Those weekends spent in the back office of Johnson's Hardware became a fixture of our lives for over 15 years. Our routine became relentless but necessary. I would wake up at 5:30 every morning to prepare for school, drop Allison off at her school by 7:30, teach until 3, pick her up from after-school programs. At 5, help with homework, prepare dinner, grade papers, and collapse into bed. Weekends were consumed by my bookkeeping job, with Allison often sitting in the corner of the office doing homework or reading while I balanced accounts. Vacations became a luxury we could not afford. When other families took summer trips to Disney World or beach resorts, I enrolled Allison in affordable day camps or arranged for her to stay with my sister Janet for a week. Christmas gifts were modest but thoughtful. I became an expert at finding quality items at thrift stores and sales that would not make my daughter feel different from her peers. Through all this, I made sure Allison never felt the full weight of our financial struggles. I wanted her to focus on her education and developing her talents. She showed an early aptitude for debate and public speaking, joining the debate team in middle school and eventually becoming captain in high school. I never missed a debate competition, even when it meant driving 3 hours each way after a full day of teaching. Allison excelled academically, consistently earning straight A's, and eventually becoming valedictorian of her high school. The day she received her acceptance letter to Dartmouth with a partial scholarship was one of the proudest moments of my life. I still remember how we danced around the kitchen, the letter clutched in her hands, both of us crying tears of joy. But even with the scholarship, college expenses were daunting. I refinanced our home to help cover what the scholarship didn't. I increased my weekend hours and even took on tutoring during summer breaks. Every dollar was carefully budgeted and saved. During her undergraduate years, I began to notice subtle changes in Allison. Her clothes became more expensive, her tastes more refined. She made friends with students from wealthy families, spending holidays at their vacation homes rather than returning to our modest house. I told myself this was natural, that she was expanding her horizons and experiencing opportunities I wanted her to have. When she announced her intention to attend law school at Columbia, I supported her wholeheartedly, despite knowing what it would mean financially. By then, I had paid off most of the first refinancing, but would need to take out additional loans. I was 55 at that point, and should have been focused on retirement savings. Instead, I took out a second mortgage and dipped into what little retirement fund I had managed to build. Law school transformed Allison even further. She interned at prestigious firms, wore designer clothes, and adopted mannerisms and speech patterns that sometimes made her seem like a stranger. She became increasingly critical of our hometown, our house, and occasionally of me. Little comments about my clothes being outdated or my opinions being provincial began to pepper our conversations. I rationalized these changes as part of her growth, her adaptation to a new world of opportunities that I had sacrificed to provide. And truthfully, I was still so proud of her accomplishments that I overlooked the growing distance between us. When she secured a position at Franklin and Marsh, one of the top corporate law firms in Boston, with a starting salary that was 5 times what I made after 30 years of teaching, I felt my sacrifices had been worthwhile. After law school, our communication became more sporadic. Sunday phone calls became monthly, then occasional. Visits home dwindled to major holidays, and even those were often cut short due to work emergencies. Allison bought a sleek apartment in downtown Boston, furnished with modern pieces that looked like they belonged in a magazine. When I visited for the first time, I felt out of place among the minimalist decor and smart home technology that Allison navigated effortlessly. The subtle condescension I had noticed during her college years became more pronounced. She would explain simple concepts to me as though I were a child, sigh impatiently when I asked her to repeat something about her work, and make jokes to her friends about my technological ineptitude when she thought I couldn't hear. Still, I continued to reach out to try to maintain our connection. I made efforts to learn about her work, reading articles about corporate law and financial regulations so I could engage with her conversations. I tried using the smartphone she had given me for my 65th birthday, though I found the constant updates and notifications overwhelming. I even joined Facebook and Instagram to see the glimpses of her life that she shared more readily with acquaintances than with me. The pattern of dismissive comments continued to escalate, especially regarding technology. When I struggled to use the food delivery app she had installed on my phone, she laughed and told her friend on the phone that I was hopeless with anything invented after 2000. When I couldn't figure out how to connect to her wireless printer, she rolled her eyes and said, "This is why I just handle all her tech issues when I visit. It's easier than explaining it every time." Each comment stung, but I swallowed my hurt, telling myself she didn't mean to be unkind, that this was just the generational gap between us. I was, after all, from an analog generation trying to navigate an increasingly digital world. Perhaps I was being too sensitive. Perhaps this was the price of her success in a world so different from the one in which I had raised her. Despite these moments, I still cherished our relationship and held on to the hope that as Allison matured further, she would regain appreciation for the values I had tried to instill. I believed that underneath the polished corporate attorney was still the compassionate, thoughtful daughter I had raised. I was waiting for that daughter to re-emerge, not realizing that it might take a moment of crisis to bring her back. The invitation to Allison's dinner party came unexpectedly during one of our infrequent phone conversations. She mentioned casually that she was hosting some colleagues from the firm, including a senior partner, and thought it might be nice for me to meet them. I was surprised but delighted. This felt like an olive branch, an opportunity to be included in her professional world. "I would love to come," I told her, trying to contain my excitement. "When is it?" "2 weeks from Saturday," she replied. "Nothing too formal, but these are important people from work, so business casual at least." I spent the next 2 weeks preparing for this dinner. I wanted to make Allison proud to fit in with her sophisticated colleagues. I withdrew $300 from my carefully managed savings account to buy a new outfit, something that wouldn't look out of place in her elegant apartment. I settled on a navy blue pantsuit that the saleswoman assured me was timeless and appropriate for a business dinner. I even splurged on having my hair professionally colored and styled, something I usually did myself to save money. The day of the dinner, I drove the 90 minutes to Boston with butterflies in my stomach. I parked in the expensive garage beneath Allison's building, wincing at the $30 fee but reminding myself this was a special occasion. As I rode the elevator to the 12th floor, I rehearsed topics of conversation that might interest attorneys, mentally reviewing articles I had read about recent Supreme Court decisions. Allison opened the door looking stunning in a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my entire month's pension. Her hair was swept up in an elegant twist, her makeup flawless. "Mom, you're early," she said, glancing at her watch with a slight frown. "Only 15 minutes," I replied, leaning in to hug her. She returned the hug briefly before stepping back to assess my appearance. "The suit looks nice," she said, and I felt a flush of pleasure at her approval. "Come in. I'm just finishing the hors d'oeuvres." I followed her into the apartment and was struck again by how beautiful it was. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the Boston skyline. The open-concept kitchen gleamed with stainless steel appliances and marble countertops. The living room featured a sectional sofa in soft gray leather, accented with jewel-toned pillows that added pops of color to the otherwise monochromatic space. "Can I help with anything?" I asked, watching as she arranged prosciutto-wrapped asparagus on a slate serving board. "No, I've got it under control," she said quickly. "But you can pour yourself a glass of wine if you want. The white in the fridge is open." I navigated her high-tech refrigerator, eventually finding the wine, and pouring myself a modest glass. I wandered around the living room, taking in the details of my daughter's life. There were few personal photographs, but several framed degrees and professional certificates hung in perfect alignment on one wall. A bookshelf held legal textbooks and biographies of Supreme Court justices. As I was looking at the books, the doorbell rang. Allison answered it, welcoming a couple who introduced themselves as Megan and Brendan. Megan was a junior partner at the firm, I learned, and Brendan worked in finance. Both were impeccably dressed and carried themselves with the easy confidence of people accustomed to success. "This is my mother," Tammy Allison said, and I noticed she didn't use the usual "my mom" that had been her lifelong habit, but the more formal "my mother." "Lovely to meet you," Megan said, shaking my hand firmly. "Allison mentions you often." I wondered if this was true or just polite conversation. Brendan nodded and immediately moved toward the drinks Allison had pointed out. Over the next 20 minutes, the remaining guests arrived. There was David, a senior associate with a booming laugh and kind eyes; Jessica, another junior partner who specialized in mergers and acquisitions; and her husband Tyler, a pediatric surgeon; and finally the guest of honor, Lawrence Hoffman, the managing partner of Allison's firm, who arrived alone, explaining his wife was at a charity function. The apartment filled with the sounds of professional small talk, market trends, recent cases, hospital politics from Tyler. I listened attentively, smiling and nodding, waiting for natural openings where I might contribute to the conversation. "So Mrs. Williams, Allison tells us you were a teacher," Lawrence said during a lull, and I was grateful for his inclusive gesture. "Yes, elementary school. 4th grade for most of my career," I replied. "I retired 3 years ago." "My mother was a teacher," Lawrence said with a genuine smile. "Toughest job there is, if you ask me." I warmed to him immediately. It has its challenges, but the rewards are immeasurable. "I could never do it," Jessica interjected. "All those children all day long. I can barely handle my nephews for an afternoon." The conversation shifted to education briefly, allowing me to share some insights from my years in the classroom. Allison looked slightly tense but remained silent as I spoke about the changes I'd seen in education over 3 decades. As we moved from the living room to the dining table, the talk returned to legal matters. Allison had prepared an impressive meal, serving a roasted beet salad with goat cheese as the first course. I complimented her cooking, remembering how I had taught her basic recipes when she was in middle school, simple dishes that were a far cry from this sophisticated menu. "Allison, this case you're handling for Tech Vision, how's that progressing?" Lawrence asked, as we began the main course, a perfectly cooked salmon with asparagus and quinoa. "We're finalizing the discovery phase," Allison replied confidently. "Their blockchain documentation is finally in order, so we should be moving to deposition next month." The table erupted in a discussion about blockchain technology and its legal implications. Terms like distributed ledger and smart contracts flew around the table. I listened attentively, genuinely interested, but increasingly lost in the technical jargon. Finally, during a momentary pause, I decided to engage. "I find all this technology fascinating, though I admit it's a bit beyond me. Could someone explain what exactly a smart contract is? It sounds like something that would think for itself." There was a brief silence, and I saw Allison tense slightly, but it was David who responded. "That's actually a great question," he said kindly. "A smart contract isn't actually smart in the AI sense. It's essentially a program stored on a blockchain that runs automatically when predetermined conditions are met. No intermediaries needed." I nodded, appreciative of his clear explanation. "So it's more like an automated contract than a truly intelligent one. That makes sense." "It's revolutionary for transactions," Jessica added. "We're seeing them disrupt everything from real estate to intellectual property." Speaking of disruption, Lawrence said the digital transformation in the legal field itself is remarkable. "When I started practicing, we had libraries full of law books. Now everything's searchable instantly." "I've been encouraging our team to embrace legal tech tools," Allison said. "The AI-driven research platforms save hundreds of billable hours." "What's the name of that document review system you mentioned last week?" Megan asked. "The one with the integrated machine learning." "Contract IQ," Allison replied. "It's incredible. It can analyze a 1,000-page agreement in minutes, flagging potential issues that would take associates days to find manually. I was genuinely curious and wanted to keep up with the conversation. That sounds impressive. Does it use the same technology as those self-driving cars I've been reading about? Neural networks, I think they're called. The moment the question left my lips, I saw it happen. Allison's eyes rolled dramatically toward the ceiling, her head tilting slightly back in an exaggerated motion that everyone at the table could see. She let out a short, dismissive laugh that cut through the conversational atmosphere like a knife. "Mom can't even use email properly," she announced to the table with an amused tone. "Last week she called me because she couldn't find an attachment I sent her." The words stung, but what hurt more was the way she was looking at her colleagues, not at me, as if inviting them to join in her amusement at my expense. "It took 20 minutes on the phone to explain she needed to click on the paperclip icon," Allison continued, warming to her topic. "And don't even get me started on the time she tried to set up her own Wi-Fi. I had to drive all the way to her house because she couldn't tell the difference between the modem and the router." There were uncomfortable chuckles around the table. I saw Lawrence shift slightly in his seat, his expression carefully neutral. Jessica and Megan exchanged a quick glance. David looked down at his plate. "The other day she asked me what the cloud was," Allison added, seemingly oblivious to the growing discomfort of her guests. "I tried explaining it wasn't actually in the sky, and she asked if it was underground then." She laughed again, louder this time, looking around the table expectantly. The joke fell flat. Tyler cleared his throat. Brendan took a long sip of wine. I sat completely still, my fork suspended halfway to my mouth, frozen in the moment. A wave of heat rushed to my face, and I felt a sick, hollow sensation in the pit of my stomach. The dining room with its elegant lighting and expensive dinnerware seemed to recede momentarily as memories flooded my consciousness. I remembered sitting at our kitchen table with bleary eyes at midnight, grading papers, while calculating how to stretch my paycheck to cover Allison's field trip to Washington, D.C. I saw myself standing in line at the bank to take out a loan for her first year of college tuition, the anxiety of adding more debt at my age, making my hands shake as I signed the paperwork. I recalled the weekend I sold my mother's antique silver service, the only valuable thing I had inherited to help pay for Allison's law school application fees and LSAT prep course. For a moment I couldn't breathe properly. The physical sensation of humiliation was overwhelming, a constriction in my chest that made each heartbeat painful. 20 years of sacrifices, of putting my own needs last, of working, to the point of exhaustion, reduced to a punchline about my technological incompetence. In the silence that followed Allison's failed joke, I could hear the soft classical music playing from hidden speakers somewhere in the apartment, the tick of an expensive wall clock, the clink of silverware, as someone, perhaps Megan, nervously continued eating. I had a choice to make in that moment. The easier path, the one I had taken many times before, would be to laugh it off, to join in the joke at my own expense, to be the good sport, the unassuming mother who didn't make waves or cause embarrassment. I could smile and say something self-deprecating to ease the tension, allowing Allison to save face in front of her colleagues. Or I could speak up. For so long I had swallowed my hurt feelings in the name of maternal love. I had justified Allison's increasingly dismissive behavior as a necessary phase of her independence. I had told myself that her success was worth any personal slight I might endure. But sitting there at that beautifully appointed table, being served food on plates that cost more than I spent on groceries in a month, something inside me finally said enough. The realization came with startling clarity. By remaining silent, I wasn't just hurting myself. I was allowing Allison to become someone who thought it was acceptable to humiliate a parent for a laugh. I was enabling behavior that would ultimately damage her character and her relationships. True love, I suddenly understood, sometimes meant having the courage to create uncomfortable moments. I looked around the table at these accomplished professionals, people whose respect Allison craved. They looked uncomfortable, even embarrassed for me. For all their education and success, they recognized the lack of respect in Allison's behavior. Their discomfort gave me courage. I thought about what to say, how to respond. Anger would be easiest, a sharp retort that would sting as I had been stung. But that wasn't the example I wanted to set. Nor did I want to whine or complain about my treatment. This moment called for dignity, for truth, spoken clearly but without malice. I took a deep breath and made my decision. This would be a turning point in our relationship for better or worse. And regardless of how Allison might react, I owed it to myself to stand in my truth after all these years of silent accommodation. The weight of the moment settled on me, but instead of feeling burdened, I felt oddly liberated. The time for polite pretense had passed. Whatever came next would at least be honest, and in that honesty, there was a kind of freedom I hadn't allowed myself for far too long. I placed my napkin carefully on the table beside my plate and stood up slowly. The conversation already subdued after Allison's remarks died completely as all eyes turned toward me. I felt a momentary tremor in my hands but clasped them loosely in front of me to steady them. I think I should say something. I began my voice quieter than normal but surprisingly steady. I looked directly at Allison, whose expression shifted from confusion to alarm as she realized I wasn't simply excusing myself to the restroom. Allison is right that I struggle with technology sometimes, I continued. At 68, I didn't grow up with computers or smartphones. They don't come as naturally to me as they do to all of you. I paused, gathering my thoughts. Lawrence and David were watching me with undisguised interest. Jessica's discomfort seemed to have increased while Megan was staring at her plate. Brendan and Tyler looked like they wished they could disappear. What Allison didn't mention is that I became a single mother when she was 9 years old, after her father died unexpectedly from a heart attack. I saw Allison's face pale slightly. This was not something she typically shared with colleagues. I was suddenly the sole provider for our family, working as an elementary school teacher. For those of you unfamiliar with teacher salaries in the 90s, let me assure you they were even more inadequate than they are today. I smiled slightly, not wanting to seem bitter, so I took a second job doing bookkeeping at a local hardware store every weekend for 15 years. I taught myself accounting from library books because we needed the income. Lawrence nodded, almost imperceptibly, his expression thoughtful. We didn't take a vacation for 11 years. I refinanced our home twice to help pay for Allison's education. When she was accepted to Dartmouth, I was 51 years old and should have been building my retirement fund. Instead, I took out a second mortgage. I turned slightly to address the whole table. When Allison decided to attend Columbia Law School, I was so proud and so determined to support her dream that I cashed in the small retirement account I had managed to build. I'm still paying off the last $27,000 of her student loans, which is why I drive a 15-year-old car and live in the same modest house where she grew up. Allison's eyes had widened her face, now flushed with color. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. I don't say any of this to make Allison feel guilty. I continued, my voice still calm. Every sacrifice was my choice, made out of love, and a desire to give her opportunities I never had. I would make those choices again in a heartbeat. I squared my shoulders slightly, but I did believe that I was raising a daughter who understood the value of respect, especially toward people who may not have her advantages or talents. I thought I had taught her that a person's worth isn't measured by their technical skills or earning potential. The room was absolutely silent now. Even the background music seemed to have faded away. I may not understand blockchain or smart contracts. I may struggle with email attachments sometimes, but I know how to sacrifice for someone I love. I know how to work without complaint when things are hard. I know how to live within my means and find joy in simple things. I looked directly at Allison again. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. These are also valuable skills, Allison. Different from yours, but no less important in building a good life and being a good person. I took a deep breath before delivering my final thoughts. I don't expect special treatment or constant gratitude, but I do expect basic respect, the kind we owe to all people, regardless of their station in life or their facility with technology. The kind I tried to model for you throughout your childhood, the kind I believe you're capable of showing not just to your colleagues and clients, but to the woman who loves you more than anyone else in this world. I didn't raise my voice or allow emotion to overcome me, though I felt a deep well of feeling beneath my carefully chosen words. I simply spoke my truth plainly and with dignity. Thank you all for listening. You've been very kind guests. I nodded slightly to acknowledge the table. Allison, the meal is delicious. You've become quite the accomplished cook. With that, I sat back down and picked up my water glass, taking a small sip to ease the dryness in my throat. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity, though it was probably only seconds. The silence that descended upon the dining room was profound. For several long moments, no one moved or spoke. Forks remained suspended, wine glasses untouched. The only sound was the faint ticking of the designer wall clock and the distant urban hum 12 stories below. I had not raised my voice or spoken with anger, yet my words seemed to hang in the air with undeniable weight. I took another sip of water, my heart racing despite my outwardly calm demeanor. When I dared to look at Allison directly, I saw tears forming in her eyes. Not the theatrical tears of someone seeking sympathy, but the genuine, unguarded tears of painful recognition. Her perfectly applied mascara began to smudge slightly at the corners as she blinked rapidly, trying to maintain her composure. Lawrence Hoffman, the managing partner, was the first to break the silence. He cleared his throat and placed his napkin on the table. "My mother worked as a secretary to put me through college," he said, his deep voice gentle but firm. "When I got my first big case, I took her to dinner at the Four Seasons. She ordered chicken because everything else on the menu seemed too extravagant to her. The waiter was a bit dismissive, and I'll never forget how she handled it with more grace than I would have." He looked directly at Allison. "We never outgrow the need to honor the people who sacrificed for us. In fact, the more success we achieve, the more important it becomes to remember how we got here." Megan, who had been staring at her plate, looked up. "My parents immigrated from Vietnam with nothing. My father worked 3 jobs so I could focus on school." She hesitated, then added, "I was ashamed of him when I was younger because his English wasn't perfect. It's my deepest regret now." One by one, others at the table shared brief stories of parental sacrifices and the complicated emotions that accompanied success and social mobility. David spoke about his mother who cleaned houses to support his education. Jessica mentioned her father who drove a taxi at night so he could attend her school events during the day. Even Brendan, who had seemed the most detached, mentioned his grandmother who had raised him after his parents' divorce. Allison listened to these stories with increasing distress evident on her face. She tried at first to laugh off the situation, saying, "Well, this got serious quickly," but when no one joined in her laughter, she fell silent again. I could see her struggling to process what was happening, to reconcile her professional persona with this unexpected moment of raw truth. Tyler, Jessica's husband, who had remained quiet throughout most of the dinner, surprised everyone by addressing me directly. "Mrs. Williams, as someone who works with children every day, I can tell you that what you've done for your daughter is extraordinary. Not everyone would make those sacrifices." He glanced at Allison. "You should be very proud of your mother." Allison's composure finally broke. A tear spilled down her cheek, leaving a track in her foundation. "I am," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I am proud of her." I felt a complex mix of emotions. Vindication, yes, but also sadness that it had come to this, and concern for Allison's embarrassment. This had never been about humiliating her, only about establishing a boundary that should have been set long ago. "If you'll excuse me for a moment," I said quietly, rising from my chair again. "I just need to freshen up." As I made my way to the bathroom down the hallway, I heard Lawrence say, "You know, Allison, the most successful attorneys I've known have one thing in common. They understand that technical expertise is important, but emotional intelligence and personal integrity matter more in the long run." In the relative privacy of the bathroom, I leaned against the sink and took several deep breaths. My hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. I hadn't planned to speak up like that, had never confronted Allison so directly before. Part of me worried I had irreparably damaged our relationship. Another part knew it had been necessary, perhaps long overdue. I splashed cool water on my face and looked at myself in the mirror. I saw the lines earned from years of worry and hard work, but also the strength that had carried me through widowhood, financial struggles, and single parenthood. For perhaps the first time in years, I felt proud of not just what I had done for Allison, but of who I was in my own right. As I dried my hands, I heard footsteps in the hallway, then a soft knock on the door. "Mom, it's me. Can I come in?" I opened the door to find Allison standing there. Her makeup smudged her confident posture, replaced by the slumped shoulders I remembered from when she was a teenager in distress. "I'm sorry," she said immediately, the words tumbling out. "I'm so sorry. I was showing off and being stupid and thoughtless, and I'm sorry." I nodded, accepting her apology, but not rushing to comfort her. This was a moment for her to sit with her discomfort, to fully experience the consequences of her behavior without me smoothing it over as I had so many times before. What I said in there was cruel, she continued, when I didn't immediately respond. It was disrespectful and just wrong. So wrong. Yes, it was, I agreed simply. Please come back to dinner, she pleaded. I'll apologize to everyone. I'll make this right. I considered her request. I think I might head home, Allison. It's been a long evening and I have a drive ahead of me. Her face fell. Mom, please don't leave like this. Everyone loves you. Lawrence keeps talking about how impressive you are. Jessica asked if you'd want to speak at her women's mentoring group about resilience. I was surprised by this information but remained steady in my decision. I appreciate that, but I think tonight has been emotional enough. Your guests deserve to enjoy the rest of their evening without more drama. Then I'll come over tomorrow, she said quickly. We can talk properly. Please, Mom. I nodded, seeing the genuine remorse in her eyes. That would be good. We do need to talk, Allison. Not just about tonight, but about the patterns in our relationship over the past few years. She looked down, nodding slightly. I know, I haven't been the daughter you deserve. For the first time since the incident at the dinner table, I reached out and touched her arm gently. You are exactly the daughter I love with all my heart. But we've lost our way a bit in how we treat each other. We need to find our way back. She nodded again, tears flowing freely now. I'll come over around 11 tomorrow. I'll bring brunch. That sounds nice, I replied. For now, go take care of your guests. Be the gracious hostess I know you can be. As I gathered my purse and prepared to leave, I could hear the conversation in the dining room had resumed, though in a more subdued tone. Lawrence was discussing his own mother's influence on his career choices. The atmosphere had shifted from professional networking to something more authentic and personal. Allison walked me to the door, insisting on calling me a car service instead of letting me drive home. As I waited for the elevator, she hugged me tightly, reminding me of the little girl who had once clung to me after her father's funeral, seeking security in an uncertain world. I love you, Mom, she whispered. I love you too, I replied, meaning it completely despite the evening's difficulties. Always have, always will. As the elevator doors closed between us, I saw her wipe her eyes and straighten her shoulders, preparing to return to her guests and face the consequences of her actions with the dignity I had always tried to teach her. The Sunday morning after the dinner party dawned clear and cool. I woke early, as was my habit after decades of teaching, and spent the quiet hours before Allison's arrival tidying my already neat home and preparing mentally for our conversation. The night before had been transformative in ways I was still processing, and I wanted to approach our discussion with clarity and compassion. At 11:15, Allison's car pulled into my driveway. Through the front window, I watched her sit for a moment, seemingly gathering her courage, before emerging with a large bag from my favorite bakery and what looked like a gift box tucked under her arm. When I opened the door, I was struck by how different she looked from the polished professional of the night before. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face free of makeup, and she wore jeans and a faded Dartmouth sweatshirt I had given her years ago. She looked younger, more vulnerable, more like the daughter I remembered. Hi, Mom, she said tentatively. Come in, I replied, stepping back to allow her entry. The coffee's fresh. We moved to the kitchen, the heart of our home, where so many conversations had unfolded over the years. As I poured coffee into mugs, Allison unpacked pastries and fruit, arranging them on the plates I had owned since before she was born. I didn't sleep much last night, she began, sitting at the familiar oak table. After everyone left, I just sat in my apartment thinking about everything you said. Everything I've been doing. I nodded, giving her space to continue. Lawrence pulled me aside before he left, she added. He told me I had a lot to learn about leadership and character. That technical brilliance without emotional intelligence was a career liability. I raised my eyebrows, surprised by his directness. But it wasn't just that, she continued. After you left, the whole conversation changed. Everyone started talking about their parents, their backgrounds, the sacrifices that got them where they are. Jessica told me she calls her dad every Sunday, no matter how busy she is, just to thank him for everything he did. She pushed a raspberry Danish around her plate without eating it. I realized I was the only one at the table who treated a parent with disrespect. the only one who seemed to have forgotten where I came from. The admission hung between us, honest and painful. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, too," I said finally, "about how we got here. I share some responsibility, Allison. I never established boundaries when your behavior first started changing. I was so proud of your success, so determined not to hold you back, that I accepted treatment I shouldn't have." Allison looked up sharply. "Mom, no, this isn't on you. I was cruel and dismissive, and I've been that way for years. There's no excuse." "It's not about excuses," I replied. "It's about understanding patterns so we can change them. You didn't suddenly become disrespectful overnight. It happened gradually, and I allowed it because I didn't want to risk our relationship." We talked for hours that morning, our coffee growing cold, and the pastries forgotten as we excavated years of accumulated hurts, misunderstandings, and unspoken feelings. Allison revealed how she had sometimes felt embarrassed by our socioeconomic differences from her classmates' families, how she had compensated by distancing herself from her background. I shared how isolated I had felt as she moved further into a world I couldn't access, how her occasional condescension had eroded my confidence. "I thought I was protecting you," she admitted at one point. "When I corrected your grammar or explained technology, I thought I was helping you navigate my world. I never saw it as disrespectful. I never stopped to think how it made you feel. And I never told you I acknowledged. I was so afraid of seeming like I was holding you back or making you feel guilty about your success that I swallowed my hurt feelings instead of addressing them." After our second pot of coffee, Allison reached for the gift box she had brought. "I got you something. It's not to make up for anything, just something I should have done a long time ago." Inside was a simple photo album. As I turned the pages, I found pictures of us throughout the years from her childhood through college and law school graduation. Many were photos I had never seen captured by friends or classmates. The final page held a recent professional photograph of Allison in her office, looking confident in a tailored suit. She had written beneath it, "Everything I am began with you." The gesture touched me deeply, but I was more moved by the genuine conversation we were having than by any gift. As afternoon turned to evening, we reached a difficult but important decision. Allison suggested we attend family therapy together, something I would never have proposed but immediately recognized as valuable. "We've developed habits in how we communicate," she said. "I think we need help breaking them and establishing healthier patterns." I agreed, impressed by her maturity in suggesting it. That sounds like a good step forward. The following week, we met with Dr. Samantha Keller, a family therapist recommended by one of Tyler's colleagues. In the comfortable setting of her office with its soft lighting and absence of distractions, we began the challenging work of rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect. Our first session revealed how much Allison struggled with imposter syndrome despite her outward confidence. "Sometimes I feel like I don't deserve any of this," she admitted. "Like someday everyone will realize I'm just a teacher's daughter from a small town pretending to belong." Dr. Keller helped us see how Allison's treatment of me had been partially rooted in her own insecurities, a misguided attempt to distance herself from her fears. When we're ashamed of parts of ourselves or our backgrounds, Dr. Keller explained we sometimes project that shame onto the people who remind us of those parts. This insight didn't excuse her behavior but helped us understand it more compassionately. It also opened the door to deeper conversations about identity, success, and authentic relationships. In subsequent sessions, we established concrete practices to improve our interactions. I promised to speak up immediately when I felt disrespected rather than swallowing my feelings. Allison committed to checking her tone and assumptions when explaining things to me, and to acknowledging her own knowledge limitations more readily. Between therapy appointments, we made other changes. Allison began calling more regularly, not out of obligation, but with genuine interest in my life. I made efforts to learn more about her professional world, asking thoughtful questions about her cases, without feeling intimidated by the terminology. 4 weeks after the dinner party incident, Allison invited me to her firm's charity gala. As we entered the elegantly decorated hotel ballroom, I felt a momentary anxiety about fitting in among the legal elite. But Allison stayed by my side, introducing me to her colleagues with evident pride. "This is my mother, Tammy Williams," she would say. "She taught 4th grade for 30 years and raised me on her own after my father died." When Lawrence Hoffman approached us, he greeted me warmly. "Mrs. Williams, wonderful to see you again. Allison tells me you're quite the photographer." I was surprised by this reference to my modest hobby. Allison smiled and explained I showed him the nature photos you took at Lake Winnipesaukee last summer. He's on the board of the Conservation Society and thought they were remarkable. "They're just a hobby," I demurred. "A talented eye is a talented eye," Lawrence insisted. "We're putting together a fundraising calendar for the society. Would you consider contributing some of your work?" This unexpected validation of a skill I had never taken seriously was touching, but more meaningful was the realization that Allison had been sharing positive things about me with her colleagues. Not just acknowledging my sacrifices, but celebrating my interests and abilities. As the weeks passed, our relationship continued to evolve. There were still occasional missteps and old habits that crept in, but now we had the tools and commitment to address them immediately rather than letting resentment build. The painful moment at Allison's dinner party had been necessary, a catalyst for change that neither of us would have chosen but both now recognized as valuable. Sometimes the most important growth comes from the most uncomfortable moments, a lesson that my 68 years of life had taught me repeatedly but that I was still learning to embrace. 6 months after that pivotal dinner party, Allison and I sat together on the deck of a rented beach house on Cape Cod, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The autumn air was crisp, but we were warm under shared blankets, mugs of hot cider in our hands. This weekend getaway had been Allison's idea, a deliberate choice to prioritize our relationship over the constant demands of her work. "I turned down a case today," she said, breaking our comfortable silence. "A high-profile corporate merger that would have meant working straight through the holidays." I glanced at her, surprised. The old Allison would never have declined such an opportunity. That must have been a difficult decision. She shrugged slightly. 6 months ago, it would have been unthinkable. Now it feels like the obvious choice. She took a sip of her cider. Lawrence actually approved. Said something about understanding what truly matters, being the mark of a partner-track attorney. Our relationship had transformed in ways I could never have anticipated that night at her dinner party. The painful confrontation had broken open something calcified between us, allowing new growth and healing to begin. One of the most meaningful changes was our new weekly tradition. Every Wednesday evening, regardless of her workload, Allison would come to my house for dinner. No phones were allowed at the table, no discussion of cases or firm politics. Instead, we cooked together and talked about books. We were reading memories from her childhood or current events. Sometimes we simply enjoyed comfortable silence, the kind only possible between people who truly know and accept each other. Allison had also shown remarkable patience in helping me navigate technology. Rather than sighing with exasperation when I struggled, she now took time to explain things clearly, celebrating my small victories as I became more confident. She had even created a simple illustrated guide to email attachments and printing that sat next to my computer, drawn with humor and affection, rather than condescension. "You know what Jessica said to me last week?" Allison asked, pulling her blanket tighter against a gust of cool wind. "She said she noticed how differently I speak about you now, that she wishes she had that kind of relationship with her mother." I smiled, thinking about the journey we had taken. Relationships are always works in progress. We're still learning too. "But we're learning together," Allison said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "That's the difference." Perhaps the most profound moment of our healing journey had come 2 months earlier, when Allison's firm hired a new class of associates fresh from top law schools. She had invited me to a casual reception for them at her apartment. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet my mother, Tammy Williams," she had announced to the room of eager young attorneys. There was no embarrassment in her voice, no attempt to qualify or explain my presence. Instead, she had added with genuine pride, "She's the most resilient person I know and the reason I'm standing here today." Later that evening, I had overheard her speaking to a nervous-looking young woman who had mentioned being the first in her family to attend college. "I understand that completely," Allison had said. "My mom was a teacher who worked weekends as a bookkeeper to put me through school. The imposter syndrome never fully goes away, but remember this: you belong here because of your journey, not despite it. The perspective you bring is invaluable." Hearing my daughter pass on lessons of respect and gratitude to the next generation had brought tears to my eyes. In that moment, I knew that regardless of our past difficulties, I had succeeded in the most important aspect of parenting, raising a person, capable of growth, empathy, and genuine connection. Now, watching the last sliver of sun disappear below the horizon, I reflected on the harder lessons I had learned through our conflict and reconciliation. "You know what I've realized through all this," I said. "Self-respect isn't selfish. For decades, I thought good mothering meant always putting your needs last, always accepting whatever treatment came your way for the sake of peace." Allison turned to look at me. "But it doesn't." "No," I agreed. "Sometimes the greatest gift we can give our children is showing them that everyone deserves basic respect, including ourselves, especially ourselves." "You taught me that at the dinner party," Allison acknowledged. "When you stood up and spoke your truth without anger or blame, just with dignity. It was powerful, Mom. Everyone at the firm still talks about it." I laughed softly. "Well, that wasn't my intention, but I'm glad it made an impression." Lawrence told a new client that his most important mentor wasn't his law school professor, but his mother, Allison said. "After meeting you, I understand why. There's wisdom that doesn't come from degrees or credentials." As darkness settled around us, stars beginning to appear in the clear sky, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this peaceful moment. The hurt had been necessary. The confrontation had been essential. The difficult conversations that followed had been transformative. "I've been thinking a lot about courage lately," I said. "Not the dramatic kind they show in movies, but the quiet kind that happens in ordinary moments. The courage to speak uncomfortable truths, to set boundaries, to be vulnerable. The courage to admit when you're wrong," Allison added. "To face the parts of yourself you're not proud of." "Yes," I agreed. "And I've realized that relationships that can't withstand honesty aren't really relationships worth preserving, at least not in their current form." We sat in contemplative silence for a while longer, until the chill in the air finally drove us inside. As we prepared a simple dinner together in the beach house kitchen, I marveled at how natural our interaction had become, again the tension and pretense of the past few years, replaced by authentic connection. Healing is rarely a straight line, and our relationship would always require maintenance and care. There would be future misunderstandings, moments of friction, or hurt feelings. But we now had the foundation and tools to work through them with respect and love. The greatest gift of our reconciliation was the freedom to be fully ourselves with each other. Allison no longer felt the need to perform success or sophistication in my presence. I no longer felt the need to hide my limitations or pretend to understand things I didn't. We had found our way back to authenticity, the essential ingredient in any meaningful relationship. As we move forward, I carry these lessons with me: that respect must be both given and expected, that love sometimes requires difficult honesty, that growth often emerges from pain, and that it's never too late to heal a wounded relationship if both parties are willing to do the necessary work. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself with someone you love? How did it change your relationship? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for joining me on this journey of reflection and healing. Remember, it's never too late to speak your truth with love and create the relationships you deserve.